All right, let's jump right into today's explainer. We are investigating the massive 2026 real estate shift. We're going to pull back the curtain and uncover exactly why the real estate market is experiencing such a sudden, noticeable slowdown right now. This is a journey of discovery, really, so let's dig into the facts and figure out what's actually happening beneath the surface. Okay, let's dive into this, because what we're seeing locally is a total head-scratcher. Right now, in North Central Idaho communities, think Kamia, Kuskia, Grangeville, and Stites, listings are getting heavily saved online. I mean, the views on Zillow and Realtor.com are incredibly robust. People are absolutely still looking. But out in the real world, the driveways of these properties remain completely empty. There is an unbelievably low level of physical showings, and actual offers have basically slowed to a crawl. All that digital attention is simply not translating into physical action. So we have to ask the obvious question, right? Why are buyers saving all these properties but completely hesitating to pull the trigger and make an offer? Well, one of our core philosophies here is that curiosity always comes before conclusions. We don't want to just guess. Actually, scratch that. Guessing gets us nowhere. Instead of assuming people are just taking a summer vacation, we're going to investigate the underlying economic drivers that are keeping these potential buyers totally paralyzed. We have to look at the whole chain of cause and effect. To understand that empty local driveway, we actually have to start overseas. It's like a giant domino effect. Let's walk through this macroeconomic chain reaction. Step 1 begins with geopolitical conflict, specifically tensions involving Iran and the Strait of Hormuz. When instability hits that region, Step 2 is instantly triggered, which is a massive disruption in energy markets, leading to surging oil prices. And you know what happens as those energy and transportation costs rise? Step 3 happens right here at home, rising inflation expectations. Suddenly, everyone starts worrying that inflation isn't nearly as tamed as we all hoped it was. And this brilliantly illustrates the second half of that chain reaction. As inflation fears grow, Treasury yields absolutely spike in response. Because of this, the Federal Reserve decides to hold rates steady in July 2026 rather than cutting them like people wanted. And here's where it hits home for us. Mortgage rates rise, which leads directly to that massive buyer hesitation we're seeing. Those rising borrowing costs instantly crush local purchasing power. It makes that home in Grangeville suddenly feel totally out of reach for the buyer who is just enthusiastically scrolling through photos on their phone. Now, you might be wondering about affordability in general. Affordability is determined by so much more than just the interest rate. The rate is really just one piece of a very complicated puzzle. The largest piece, for sure, is the home price itself. Then you've got to factor in household income, property taxes, insurance, and everyday living expenses. When you combine moderately high rates with historically high home prices and rising living costs, you create this incredibly volatile combination. It literally stretches a buyer's budget to the breaking point. Ultimately, it's the total monthly payment that matters, not just the rate on the loan. I love this quote because it really anchors our entire investigation. Most market behavior is the result of several connected events rather than one isolated event. I want to reassure you that the current slowdown isn't some single catastrophic failure of the housing market. It's not a crash. It's a complex web of economic forces: geopolitics, inflation, Fed policy, affordability, all culminating at the exact same time to reduce buyer urgency and push up local inventory. To truly grasp the psychology of buyers today, we have to look back just a bit to what we call the 2020s low-rate hangover. Following 2020, our entire economy, from everyday households to massive financial markets, became dangerously dependent on unusually cheap money. So many people locked in fixed 30-year mortgages at 2 to 3%. We were all partying on that cheap money. And just like any wild party, the hangover is absolutely brutal. Coming down from that cheap money high is exactly why today's environment feels so incredibly jarring to buyers. And if you want a really powerful cautionary tale of what happens when you rely on that cheap money forever, just look at commercial real estate right now. Commercial loans don't usually get those sweet 30-year fixed rates. They operate on short-term balloon loans, meaning the whole balance comes due in just 3, 5, or 10 years. Now, these properties cash flowed beautifully under cheap financing, but they assumed they could just refinance cheaply when the time came. But now, rates are high, and they are facing extreme refinancing pressure and severe stress from private credit funds. They assumed the future would look just like the past, and it cost them dearly. We have to bring that commercial lesson directly back to residential buyers. Here is a golden rule to live by. Never make a purchase affordable only by assuming rates will decline. Relying on future favorable conditions, like hoping for a guaranteed rate drop or a massive jump in equity just to afford your mortgage today, is a massive, massive risk. Your investment has to make sense under today's assumptions, not tomorrow's hopes. Now, what's really interesting about this comparison is how it totally debunks a popular myth. You'll often hear people say, "Oh, stop complaining, mortgage rates were 15% in the 1980s." But that is only half the story, right? Back then, homes cost roughly 3 times the median income. Today, it's closer to 6 or 7 times. Yes, the 70s and 80s had historically high nominal mortgage rates. However, the home price-to-income ratio was relatively low, meaning the overall payment was actually still manageable for a working family. Fast forward to July 2026, and we have moderately high rates, but historically high home prices relative to income. That leaves affordability severely strained. So the crucial takeaway here is that comparing nominal mortgage rates all by themselves is totally misleading. Today's true affordability crisis is this exact brutal equation. Moderately high rates intersecting with historic property values. That combination is exactly what is keeping those buyers saving homes on their phones, but completely avoiding the physical driveways. It's the total mathematical weight of the purchase today that has them spooked. Now that we deeply understand the problem, let's pivot. Let's talk about the opportunity. With all of this macroeconomic uncertainty causing buyers to hit the pause button, is a buyer's market finally emerging? Is this specific economic hesitation actually shifting negotiating power back into the hands of the buyer? Well, the short answer is yes. There is actually a lot of room for optimism here, but we need to clearly define what that actually means in the real world. A buyer's market today does not mean prices are suddenly collapsing by 50%. That's not happening. Instead, it means qualified buyers finally have leverage. It looks like having more properties to choose from and longer marketing times or days on market. It means fewer competing offers, which gives you much needed breathing room. But most importantly, it means seller willingness to negotiate. We are seeing incredible opportunities right now for seller concessions, rate buydowns, and even exploring creative structures like owner financing. But keep in mind, this leverage is only an advantage if you use it correctly. It's really a tale of two buyers right now. On one hand, you have the risky buyer. They rely on future appreciation and a future refinance just to survive their monthly payment. That is dangerous speculation. On the other hand, the prepared buyer is practicing wise investing. They have a comfortable payment based on today's reality, they have sufficient cash reserves, and they plan to hold the property for an appropriate period. The bottom line, you should only buy right now if the math actually works for your household income under today's conditions. And for the sellers out there navigating this shift, we have some calm, practical advice for you too. First, price honestly from day one. You have to understand that online views simply do not equal immediate demand anymore. You must prepare for longer marketing periods. And please, don't assume a lack of physical showings means your property is defective in some way. The reduced buyer pool is entirely due to macroeconomic affordability issues, not your specific home. To close a deal today, you just have to remain patient and remain flexible to reasonable concessions and creative terms. I want to anchor our entire explainer on this one foundational rule. Honestly, if you take nothing else away, remember this. A future refinance should improve a good purchase, not rescue a bad one. If the Federal Reserve eventually cuts rates in the future and you can refinance, that should be treated as an amazing financial bonus. It should absolutely not be a survival requirement for your family's budget. Make the wise decision first and let the future upside be exactly that, an upside. Which brings us to our final thought. I really want you to ask yourself, is your next real estate decision based on today's mathematical reality, or are you just wishing for yesterday's cheap money? The market is definitely shifting beneath our feet, and the rules of the game have absolutely changed. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. Stay curious, run the numbers, and we'll see you in the next explainer.